Hi, folks, and welcome to Film Optimists, where we talk about all things film with a healthy dose of optimism. I'm your co-host, Seth Boyd.
And I am Megan Tierney.
We are covering some new territory, some territory that was a long time coming. We're doing the films of Werner Herzog. So we're talking German films. We're also talking documentaries because this man has made quite a few, both feature films and documentaries, nearly 70 total films, I believe. And we're starting with a documentary first. And before we get into much into why, Megan, I don't believe you've had seen a Herzog movie before, but you had any awareness of who he was as there's a lot of jokes about him. He's a pretty kind of common internet presence. Oddly, kind of similar to Nicolas Cage, in that there's a lot of memification of this man. So before we dive into what we picked and why, I'd love to hear, what did you kind of think or vaguely put together about this man before you saw one of his films?
Well, I have a little anecdotal story about it because that he's like a meme makes a little more sense now after this mini story that I have of him, which is that having looked into, I just looked up his image real quick to get the image of who he was, and he has a very distinct, I'm sure people will realize, voice, like a very distinct German accent. And so I had inadvertently seen who this man was because there was this very interesting character in, believe it or not, Parks and Recreation, which is like, I'm rewatching Parks and Recreation, my favorite, probably I'm going to say my favorite TV show at the moment. And he's in a season 7 episode where he's selling a creepy house to Andy and April. And he was very distinct, of course, like in his personality, as he is, but also just to me, I was like, that accent is so, how could you miss it, basically? So sure enough, it was him. Right. And I looked it up just this morning to my delight after seeing this movie too. So that was really fun for me. And I can see it was a very funny character, like very, he's playing a creepy guy and like a creepy old-timey house kind of thing, and he really played into, I think he had a joke about like, I want to move to Disney World after this, or like move to Florida to be near Disney World. So I could see the humor in him as well. So I had seen him technically. I was like, yes, I recognized him at least from something.
I'm so glad to hear that, because like I was about to give his kind of pop cultural credentials. He's been in The Simpsons. He's been in Rick and Morty, American Dad. He's voiced parodies of himself on like the Boondocks. But I think for as much as he certainly has a reputation for being this very intimidating intellectual, some say crazy filmmaker, and we'll get to that a little bit, he's also very much aware of his personality, his persona, and really plays into it. He has a very great sense of humor, I think, and knows that he's famous for these long, intense monologues in his own films that he's narrating, and has this very intimidating presence, and also gone to some very extreme lengths to make movies. Most famously for the film Fritz Carlardo, about a man pulling a steamship up a mountain. He did actually pull a steamship up a mountain in the middle of the jungle. That's wasn't necessary, but he decided to do that. So that's the most extreme, or among the most extreme things. He's been arrested many times making movies. He often shoots without permits. He teaches a rogue film school where he says lockpicking and forgaging documents will be part of the curriculum there. He's done this several times. So he stole his first camera to make his first movie. So he has a very much extremeness about him. I think it can sometimes get warped into this hyper masculine thing that I don't think is necessarily fair. I think he's a little bit beyond that. But that's one of the reasons we did this movie, which is Into the Inferno.
Yes.
Which is not one of the more, it's a very good one from 2016, but it's if you talk to someone who looks like me who really wants to tell you about Herzog, this is probably not the first 5 movies that comes out. And so we're kind of doing some of the more off the beaten path ones. Grizzly Man is maybe his most famous documentary more recently, which is a great movie, but I just thought I had an opportunity to tell a friend about Herzog from the ground up.
Yeah.
So I'm using that to highlight some of the different ones.
That was actually a question that I had early on in watching Into the Inferno, because something that stood out to me was that this felt like a very like straightforward, what we would consider like modern documentary. Like I thought it was very kind of straightforward, a very good one right off the bat, but what we would expect a Netflix documentary to be, and not even that, and that's not a dig. Like I said, I thought it was great. It's just that I think that documentaries have a very specific like cadence nowadays, and like just the way that it was shot, everything. So I was wondering, like, is that pretty true to his filmography, or I assume that previous ones may have been more like even like experimental, or I was wondering like how it held up, I guess, to his previous filmography.
No, that's a great point, because I think this is a fairly straightforward one, and but it gets to like a lot of the cores of the things he's interested in. But he definitely has ones that are a lot more experimental. Like he has a documentary about mirages, but it's not really about like the science about how mirages at all. It's just kind of some cultural studies as to a few different cultures that happens and the myths they made up about them. And it's a lot of footage of desert. You know, there's not any narration over that. So he certainly has things that are much more experimental. But I think the main three things that I like about this movie that kind of tie together who Herzog is and what he's most interested in is myth, poetry, and anthropology. Because he's very, very interested in other cultures, and he always treats them, to my mind, with a lot of respect and takes them seriously. He's very curious with the myth and the poetry of the whole world. But no, you're absolutely right, Megan. This is maybe a more straightforward one than some of his other ones, but I think it still has the incredible cinematography that you expect from him. That's always going to be a staple in a Herzog movie. It's going to look beautiful, and he's in places that other people probably want to go. In this movie, that's North Korea. Not exactly a place we shoot regularly. Herzog is very interested in anthropology as well as myth. And I think he really takes seriously in this movie these very strange cultures we see. We have a couple indigenous tribes who have very, very specific and strange beliefs that all revolve around volcanoes. And I don't know, what was your take, Megan? But for me, he never feels like he's saying, look, it's crazy people. You know, he seems to treat it with a lot of respect without commentary.
Not at all. I completely agree with that. And it felt very like he takes kind of an anthropological like look into a lot of cultures as well, and very different cultures. We go from like Iceland here to the the Amazon rainforest and everywhere in between, or many places in between also. So that's really cool too. And his kind of like guiding voice underneath it all really strings it all together nicely, and holds it in the same like reverent kind of light for each culture. So it's true, it was a nice little it felt very like academic, but not in a bad sense. It felt very very reverent of these cultures and these people specifically.
Right. No, I think we should get back to something you were saying a moment ago about like how stylized this movie, because it does look a lot like what we expect of a nature doc now. And I don't want to go too far on a limb and say he's shaped what all documentaries like. He's a very influential filmmaker, and he's been making documentaries since the late 60s, I believe, or early 70s. So there certainly is like a reference there, but he's also was very adamant about the main style documentaries were being made when he came out, the movement called cinema verite, which is cinema of truth, which was just supposed to be you just point the camera and you record things, and you're not supposed to have any style to it at all. You're just supposed to make this as bare bones, just recording facts. And he is very anti this. Now, folks, we've said a few times that we've referred to Werner Herzog as German, which is technically true, but I should clarify something. He is very strict in referring to himself as Bavarian. And he gives the example, a Scotsman would not be so quick to accept being called British. So apologies, Mr. Herzog, you are Bavarian. This is one of his rare non-German language movies. A lot of his documentaries are still in German. Some of his more recent movies have been in English. So this is also on the note of accessibility. If you can't get over the subtitle barrier, that's still a challenge. This is a good one to get into for that reason. One thing I just want to clarify that I think is really interesting about him, and we talked a little bit about his respect for the cultures he interviews in this, is Herzog was initially very interested in religion, was devoutly religious, and actually intended to become a priest. I believe a Catholic priest. They are now an atheist, but they've spoken in interviews, they still have a lot of reverence for spirituality and for a person's deep held personal beliefs. They have, quote my lovely wife, Anne Boyd, who I think summarized his views very easily. He leaves room for mysticism and the beauty of the vast unknown in the universe while having no time for woo-woo bullshit. He is not very interested in any kind of anything that we would consider new age hippie, particularly in American bastardization of that. He's very bored and uninterested in that. But indigenous tribe has a very specific belief that goes back hundreds of years, thousands of years, or only less than 100 years in one of these cases. He's very interested in people who have these earnest belief that is grounded in something is of great interest to him. So Megan, we go all over the world in this. Did any particular section stand out to you?
And it's true, like they're all really beautiful. I mean, for me, cinematography alone, like the shots of this is about volcanoes. We got a lot of literally incredible shots of lava, magma it looks hypnotic, like it looks almost unreal, which is really cool. So I was kind of blown away by that. It was really nice to see. But then for me, I tend to love like Amazonian culture a lot, and I find it very interesting. We go to, I'm blanking on the actual place. I think it's in, I believe it's, I'm blanking on the place of, it was a tribe, excuse me, of previous, they were like, they used to be cannibals in like a past life, which was really interesting.
But I think they're in Indonesia.
Indonesia, yes. And that's always really fascinating to me. He sets up his subjects so well to me because it's clear that they, that a lot of people look straight into the camera, and that's kind of the technical no-no in film. And I like it so much more in documentary because it feels, do get a sense of the newness of it, and it takes me back to like, this is a documentary, like someone's film. There's a little bit of a crew there, probably a small crew, but I really like to think of the humanitarian aspect that's going on like in these interactions. I just find it always really fascinating, and getting that crazy slice of life of the different life that we don't get it's almost like invaluable. It's amazing that he's able to get these.
No, that's a great point on the note of how he frames the interviews, and that's one of the things that he's very adamant about, that is in contrast with what we mentioned earlier, cinema verite, of you're not supposed to stage anything under that mindset. He thinks that's very silly. If something ruined the take, why keep that take? Have the person say it again. Or he's giving an example. If someone tells you a fascinating story but it's 40 minutes long, you might need to tell them like, this is great, but can you do like the 5-minute version of it? Like, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's going to make a better, more interesting film.
I see.
So I think there's certainly some of that going on, and there's the going back to that section with the formerly cannibal tribe, they at one point kind of recreate the ritual where they practice and reverence that, which was that kind of has a sense of, we're doing this for the camera, but it's great. They wanted and you have these very proud little kids making their angry, scary faces, but also reflecting on something that was pretty horrifying of cannibalism. So that was a very oddly sweet, but reflecting on their real history and talking about it in a very interesting way.
Right. I mean, the biggest sense that I got, even from basically with any interaction that he had with the interviews or who he set up, he portrayed people in to me in a reverent light. Like even the more eccentric scientist from America, the guy from Berkeley.
From Berkeley, yes.
It was really fun, but he was kind of like goofing on him. I felt like a little bit because he's the guy was goofing on himself, sort of, because he was just a very eccentric guy, really excited about like the artifacts that he was finding, which is heartwarming in itself. I love being an eccentric professor. Like that's my jam all the time. So he was great, but it was kind of like he showed the lightness of him as well in all these like the way that he was setting up his subjects. So I really liked that he knew when to use brevity and when to use like a little bit of reverence, or when to use a little bit of just kind of showcasing things. So that also to me felt kind of like modern, or what we would equate to a modern documentary, is just like showing the subjects in and kind of weaving them into the story as well,
Yeah.
and like into this kind of narrative, which was nice.
I'm glad you brought up that point too, because like you said, that there's a lot of brevity in that section. You do have a very eccentric, very excited, I believe, paleoanthropologist who's really excited to find the fossils, to find actual bones. But they're also in an area that, as they mention, is disputed land with an ongoing local war, and they can only be there escorted by armed guards. And you do occasionally see the armed guard. It's not like they're trying to sugarcoat it. But it's also like, and it's a really fun place to be. And here we are going to go find some human remains. And isn't that fantastic? We're having a great day in literally the hottest place on earth in Ethiopia. And I think it is, the scientists, I think, are given a lot of reverence here as well. And I think that's an important thing to note. In many occasions, we're talking about scientists, and Clive Oppenheimer in particular, who's kind of the main focus of a character in this, who is a friend of Herzog's. They met on a previous movie. They talk about inventions he's made that have actually saved lives, and so I think there's some very practical elements of this movie as well, with how far we've come with that. But for me, I think partially because it doesn't spend it spends more time on certain things you'd expect. But going back to what you said about that kind of hypnotic shots of the lava, even when you have this, okay, here is some actual information, here's some scientific data, then it's kind of punctuated by Gregorian chants and classical music and beautiful hypnotic imagery that we linger far more than an American documentary would, at least than we would expect from a mainstream one. You wouldn't have time to do that on like a Planet Earth episode. You got to keep that shit tight, like 45 minutes with commercials, So it really kind of transcends that, I think, with these moments. And for anyone who's a stickler, I apologize. They're probably not Gregorian chants, but they are chants that are beyond me, my very limited knowledge of world music.
In the range of.
It's in that realm. Yeah, exactly, in the range.
Come on,
but it is
guys.
Really fantastic score.
No, it is.
We have any musicologists write in? Tell us what the fuck it is.
Yeah, please. We'd like to know. But it does. It contributes to the hypnoticness of it. I mean, I just couldn't believe either how close they got or how good the camera was to zoom in on it like that much. That was, I mean, it's amazing. It is really, and it did feel kind of, and it reminded me, I should say, of like animal documentaries the most, or I guess nature documentaries, which it kind of is, but it also isn't. And certainly like it helped me remember that I think a lot of times nowadays I'm used to the shot of person sitting in interview section, like talking in a chair or something like that. And I'm glad that that's not done here. I don't know. I just realized like that's kind of it's never going to be that exciting to kind of see people sitting, and typically it's just not going to, like, I think for me, I'm realizing it's probably not gonna cut it when there are other things that you could cut to. So it was a good lesson for me in like setting up, if we ever do a documentary set of like us setting up people. I think I'd rather see the subject being talked about the way that Herzog does, so with so much intention and stuff like that. So I was blown away by that too.
No, I think that's a great point, because like Anne and I went on a little binge like a couple months ago watching some kind of true crime docs. Like we watched the HBO one about the McBillions, the McDonald's Monopoly scandal, and that was a pretty interesting story. But every frame, every interview is framed exactly the same way. And that, as the story can only be so good, if everything is shot the same way. You're really excited for whenever there's archival footage or whenever there's we're following somebody doing something different. That's very exciting in a documentary like that, because it's not the exact same static shot, And a lot of people who are interviewed where they are. They're interviewed in their workplace, or they're at their laboratory, or when they're out in the field, or at their village, where they would be anyways. And that just makes it feel a little more lived in than so many documentaries. We're not making sure we have coverage with 12 cameras. We're not making sure it's a controlled environment with sound. We're just there. I should note, one of Herzog's top advice for filmmakers is to make a documentary, because you're just you can't. He said the experience from just having to catch shit as it's happening, having to be there and be able to react to things is invaluable, and you'll never learn that making a feature film. You'll learn things that you can use on a feature film if you've made a documentary before. And
Nice.
oddly, he did not start with documentaries. He started feature films. He's made more, but says it's an invaluable lesson for any listeners out there who are making a film. That is a pretty good place to start.
In a way, it seems kind of purist, like cinema almost. Like I kind of get what you're saying by that quote, that it helps me understand it more, because it's like, you know, be in the moment, react. What are you going to do about that? Or like, how are you going to piece it together, kind of? And so I think on that level, if you're doing it, like as you're filming it, that's kind of like what film is all about in a way, or like a director's eye is all about, in my eyes too. So that's pretty cool. Something else I noticed like with this one is that he seemed to like refer back a lot to his, part of it also seemed like an homage to his previous stuff too, and it may be because of like his relationship with Oppenheimer is what I was thinking. That probably brought it up naturally, but that was kind of nice. Like it was like a little I'm not sure how many like films he had done before this, like regarding either the same subject or just documentaries in general, but he kind of did a little bit of an homage to his previous work and or the previous sciences that were talked about, which you said. So that's kind of nice.
That's a great point, actually, because like he doesn't typically make documentaries on the same subject, but he's now, just this year, he's made another movie about volcanoes. Or I think this came out last year. There's that French couple who's featured a little bit in archival footage.
Yes.
So actually 2 movies came out about them last year, and Herzog directed one of them called The Fire Within, which is a lot of archival footage, but also in a typical Herzog way highlights that they were filmmakers as well, that they staged a lot of things, that they took some liberties, and how he really respects them as storytellers. And I have not been able to find that one yet, but I'm excited to see that when it's available. But yeah, he has kind of returned to this subject more than you would expect for a filmmaker of such a varied filmography in terms of subject. He's made, I believe, over 30 documentaries now. But yeah, he made a documentary about a particular volcano that's referenced in this movie in the 70s. And in his movie in Antarctica, Close Encounters at the End of the World, they also examine a volcano, which is where he met Clive Oppenheimer, who's the conducting a lot of the interviews and in this movie. So it is a subject he's returned to, and it's kind of for a fan like myself, it doesn't feel indulgent. It feels kind of nice to reflect on these things in a direct way of his own career. But it's also, again, with the entryway thing, you kind of get a lot of Herzog by referencing these other things. It's like, oh, maybe we should go check out that one.
Yeah, it kind of was pointed, not like more so to Herzog, like more so to Herzog's like past filmography than this is the progress. He did talk a little bit about the progress of like of some scientific discoveries or whatnot about volcanoes, but it seems more like he's giving a little thank you and love letter to his previous work. So that was nice.
I agree. I enjoyed that. I think there's certainly a way that can be done where it feels indulgent, and I don't really know how to articulate why this didn't for me. I think you did it quite well. But it does. It's pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
We mentioned, I think previously, we should maybe dive into a little bit. Maybe the most interesting to some people aspect of this movie is that they shoot in North Korea. Did you expect that, or do you have any thoughts on how that was done? Because this is, I think, maybe the most extreme thing in the movie.
Right. And even like visually too, because we are in pretty like remote places. Well, remote places before, and then we're getting North Korea as like anybody has seen North Korea in terms of like what we're literally allowed to see in North Korea in media. But it is pretty crazy to see it like I don't know. It felt very like close up, if that's the right word, or even just like kind of in HD more than I had seen previously. And the biggest surprise for me was that insane dance show, which was
God, yeah.
They said like, did they say 100,000 like dancers?
100,000 dancers. You should describe that a little bit. Yeah.
Well, folks, I had a previous background in dance. I mean, I've been a dancer all my life, but our recitals ain't nothing like this. Like, I had never seen this. Like, I almost thought like, hey, I would do that for North Korea. That looks amazing. Because the coordination was incredible. It's just literally 100,000 dancers, they say, that maneuver these like scenes, and it is all, I think, related to the mountain or the volcano that they talk about, that they're having reference in North Korea, which is just amazing. But literally 100,000 people like on stage, coordinating and acrobatics, like all the stuff.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It is very impressive, and for folks who haven't seen it, I should clarify. There's an origin story for like the leaders of North Korea that are tied to mythology, that are tied to a volcano that erupted there, and won't get into any more than that. But as a part of their national pride in a very big way, which is really interesting to see too. After we had so many kind of small villages to see, and here's an entire nation whose government is largely founded based off of a myth involving a volcano.
Well, and I think I picked up that, like, maybe I heard this wrong, but I thought that he kind of implied that the government imposed that myth onto the people, sort of thing. Like, I think it used to be a lot more,
I think that's true,
like ancient, culturally related, like our previous places had been, but then there was North Korea's aspect is that they kind of inserted the propaganda of their government.
I believe that's correct. I think
mythos, was really interesting.
That goes back like over, I believe, 1,000 years or longer.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. And then it was co-opted for the propaganda. They also, like, on the note of impressiveness, you see these very large, I thought, fantastic statues reenacting the Civil War, the Korean Civil War. It's like, I'm obviously not endorsing North Korea as a good regime to follow, but these are very impressive pieces of art, as is the dance you mentioned. And I think that can get lost when we're talking about another nation that is that we're at odds with. Like, there's still incredible things happening there. I do like that the only real criticism, because I think for obvious reasons, this is not, and we're going to show you why North Korea is bad. There's plenty of that to find elsewhere, but the only direct moment of criticism comes, or there's twice. Herzog does just say pretty clearly, we can only present this nation as it wanted to present itself to us. Clearly, there is a front being put on here, and we're aware of that, and we're just going to show you what they showed us. There's also the moment where he is interviewing somebody and keeps trying to get him to say something in a sense of individual pride that he feels. And this person just can only speak of things as the nation's pride, as a group, as part of North Korea. And Herzog notes the lack of individuality is disturbing to him, which I think does speak volumes considering what's going on there. So I think it's subtle but effective criticism, given the boundaries that they were under to shoot there. It's all very fascinating to look at a nation that is rarely seen. We also have
that's what it was. That's what it felt like, is like kind of a sneak a look into things that we have seen already. Like I said, like I've I think I've seen that mountain before. I've certainly seen like some dance performances and the little kid dance performances like that they did. So but it's like, that's that is performative, literally, like all of it is performative of what we're seeing. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have Iceland is an interesting kind of change of topography and geography in this.
Yes, definitely true.
Going back to, again, ancient myths that are written down over 1,000 years ago. And we really go all over the world and get a sense of awe for volcanoes, but there's not a whole lot of underlying things. There's a couple of things that Clive highlights with his interviews of different people, of asking, like, where do you go when you die? Are you going to the volcano? Is something that some people kind of think, like, is that like heaven? Is that hell? The spirits live there. There's some commonalities, but not a lot, And in Iceland's case, it's more of, this is going to bring about our destruction. This is Ragnarok,
that was interesting, that the one that they have an American like GI or something, is there?
Yes, another Indonesian
what's his name?
Location. John Frum, I think.
John Frum. Yes.
Yeah.
It's just kind of
this
a funny
is the most
name.
Specific. Yeah. So do you want to describe that, Megan? Because this is by far the most unique, I think.
Well, that's about it. So from what I understand, maybe previously, like in their history, an American like troop or something had come along previously. So that's why they kind of know and have a little bit of American like isms or propaganda, or like they had an American flag and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They know of, in other words, they know of Western culture and like know what that tastes like.
Right.
But they are praying to who they call a god of this American GI called John Frum, that they're expecting to come back and receive niceties, pleasantries of Western culture, I guess is what I understand it. They're like, songs dedicated to him, like praying to this this god. And so I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. It was pretty striking to see. I think it's just striking to me that military presence could turn into that, especially American military presence, and other countries could turn into godlike reverence.
That's a great point. We have a great track record.
I was just like, that's the last thing I could ever imagine. So that was interesting. I just didn't expect it. Maybe even more than the North Korea thing. I was like, what? I just didn't expect that.
No, I think you're right. That's maybe the most interesting and surprising thing that happens in it. And we don't really get too much into the full origins of it. My assumption is that this was somebody who passed through there probably post-World War II, had been part of the Pacific campaign, maybe Philippines or something. Because it kind of get the idea that this person was like stranded there, like washed ashore or something, and then picked up. But it's also, that's another weird one. Like they're not expecting him to come and take them to the afterlife. There's going to be physical gifts on that island, including Cadillacs, which wonder, like, do they understand that Cadillac's a car because there's not roads that we're seeing, right? But it's the shit you see advertised on TV in the 50s. It's it's cigarettes, it's jeans, true. It's consumer goods from decades ago that they're very excited to be showered with because of their devotion and worship of John Frum. But even then, this is the by far the most out there idea. This is not treated as, look at these silly people. There's still a reference given to that. It's still treated the same level as everything else in the movie, I think, which is, I think, very important, and professional. Yeah.
And their connection to their volcano and that is that, like, I think a villager went in, well, not went in, but like was near the volcano enough to like spend a night there and have kind of literally a spiritual experience, like with either with John Frum or with sometimes they refer to it as a spirit. So still in the lore that the volcano produces the spiritual kind of like vortex or almost connection to the spirit realm. So it's still, even that lore still was true in this, like in that B storyline.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I think I'm always fascinated by how, like, Greek mythology is really interesting to me, because, like, how do we explain what are happening? And, like, there's the gods that are the wind that are very practical, things like that. That stuff is very interesting to me. These are not the typical versions of that story that we see in this movie. They're so varied, but still the necessity to explain the world around us and turning that from just a practical thing to a spiritual thing that provides, like, a community, because all of these cultures too have rituals around it that are pleasant. There's a lot of singing and dancing and feasts that are happening for this. So in a weird way, there's like a very pleasant side of religion being demonstrated in this movie, of the kind of community aspect, which I certainly appreciate. Getting a little bit more serious, I think I've mentioned the podcast. I was racial religious. I'm an atheist now, and I was very depressed about that when I initially realized I was not religious. And honestly, Herzog's movies were one of the reasons I felt better about it. Because in addition to just understanding what the benefit of religion was in a practical way and being able to appreciate that, but also this movie keeps restating, the volcanoes are indifferent. Nature is indifferent, and that's okay. And that was initially the idea of the world just being chaos was very frightening to me at first. And I'm not sure what it is about Herzog's movies, both his feature and his documentaries, that made me really come to terms with that and accept it and find it as beautiful that we happen to be alive at this time, and so many fascinating things are still happening
Nice.
in a different universe. I feel very fortunate. So
very nice.
I've had profound experiences with his movies, so they're very personal to me, as odd as they may seem, and as depressing as it may seem to a lot of people.
Oh, that makes me really happy to hear, Seth. I think that he brings it back to an anthropological aspect, and it's like that helped me, like, because I grew up in a Catholic, like very devout Catholic faith, and that like learning about history of things really helped me be like, okay, well, this makes sense, and why things happen the way that they do, and why literally the Bible is written the way that it is. So I like always learning about our history is what helped inform, like, for me, make a better informed decision about like faith in that way. And I love learning about faith is so interconnected to culture. Like, how am I'm never gonna knock someone's culture, so like I'd rather be a student of it and take it all in. So that's in that way, like I agree with his line of thinking and presenting these subjects. So that was really cool.
That's a great point. I think as someone who's no longer practicing religion, it can be very easy to just get into that. Well, here's what's wrong with that belief system, and that's a pretty depressing person to be, and I think unless we're talking of actual structural social laws, I don't really feel the need to poke holes in somebody else's beliefs. It's not fun for anybody. And until human rights are being violated, which does happen, then I don't think we need to be talking about
definitely.
it. But that's certainly the issue where it's relevant, but the day-to-day, not so much.
Sure.
Folks, that kind of wraps it up for discussing the movie. If you have thoughts on it, we'd love to hear them. We will be doing another Herzog film soon. More of that in a note, but in a moment. But first, recommendations. And Megan, why don't you start off?
Yeah, so I wanted to recommend a documentary, definitely, and this is one that kind of stood out to me in recent years, and this was also a Sundance 2019, which was really fun. Really good audience reaction to this one, but hold your horses, folks, because the title of it is called Hail Satan ? So this was such an interesting documentary, and shot by Penny Lane, who is an American documentarian. She's done mostly documentaries. She's a young whippersnapper of a filmmaker, like in her 40s. And this one was so fun. It's very, it takes a satirical approach to the subject at hand, which is that I think the temple of, either it's called the Temple of like Satan or satanic worshipers, are trying to put up a statue of Baphomet, which is a like one of the devils or one of the like fallen angels statue next to a very prominent Ten Commandment statue that is placed in a like in front of like a civil hall or something like that, like a very notable public place of law or something like that. And their whole point is literally like, our Constitution says that we have freedom of religion. This is our religion. Why can you impose your Ten Commandment crap on like what we want to do? So it's political in that sense, and it is very satirical. It's meant to be that way, but it's satirical in that literally our freaking like nation and foundation of a nation is satirical, and our connection to religion, especially like Christianity at the in recent years, it can be like just is a subject of in question because of all that we apparently hold true in America. So I loved it. A lot of really good audience reactions to this one. Like, it was really fun to watch it, I think, at Sundance. But it's really like it was bold, but not, if you think that that's going to be like too much, like, trust me, it's not, and you should just give it a watch. Like, you should give it your own opinion, because it was really good. It was really fun to watch.
Good. That sounds great. I forgot about that movie. I'm glad you reminded me. I'm very interested in like the Church of Satanism, or whatever its full name is founded in San Francisco, isn't it?
Yep. The temple.
My understanding is a lot of it is in reaction to Reaganism and
Yeah, it is inherently political too.
That's my understanding. Like, I mean, growing up again, Baptists, they were very horrifying to me. But I was like, I know this is largely more of a political movement than anything.
Right.
Cool. Great pick. I will be kind of on theme here with the religious thing. I'm going to do another Herzog movie, but one from 1981 called God's Angry Man, which is about one of the subjects most interesting to me, televangelists. And it's about one in particular, Gene Scott, who is famous for regularly being fined by the FCC for his TV show. And it's another one that is, I don't want to say fully reverent, but it gives a lot of respect to this person, and you hear a lot more about who he is and why he is the way he is, without saying clearly this guy's insane or clearly this guy's cool. This is an earlier Herzog one, so there's not a whole lot of his voiceover, but he does interview him towards the end. And I believe he only asks one question, which is, "Are you happy?" And 2 or 3 minutes into this answer, the subject is crying. But it's just, so it's it's a very fast movie. It has a lot of footage of you see why this guy is called that. He is often screaming at his followers, "Why aren't you paying me money? You know, I'm here doing God's work." So it's a really interesting thing. And I didn't watch him growing up, but I often, when my parents were feeling too lazy to drive to church, we would do what we call bedside Baptists, of watch whatever was on. And it's such a unique, weird, I think uniquely American thing of televangelists, that is such a weird business, and a weird way to practice religion. So getting a little bit, diving more into the roots of that from this guy who was started active, I think, in the late 60s, and this movie was made in the early 80s. It's a really fascinating time period of how something grew a little bit bigger. It's maybe a little bit critical than some of his other movies, but like understandably so. But it's another fascinating one. I think that one is free on YouTube still, folks, so give that a check.
That's super cool. I'm kind of a fan of, like, real quickly, like I'm also a fan of, I think I get my, like, news a lot from, like, comedy news sources, and, like, I'm a big, like, Last Week Tonight fan, and while obviously those are highly critical, it'd be kind of nice to see, like, Herzog's take on, because he's done televangelists like Last Week Tonight and stuff like, or The Daily Show or something like that. And obviously it's very slanderous, and to see Herzog kind of like how you say, like, talk about it, I think that would be a really interesting take, because it's kind of easy to be so slanderous. I think it would be a lot harder to do what Herzog would do with that. So that's really interesting.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think it holds up really well.
Yeah.
If you watch it, Megan, very curious to hear your thoughts on it. As we mentioned, folks, we're going to do another Herzog movie that will do a feature film. And I'm going to kind of keep with the theme started here. We're going to do one of the less off the beaten path ones, because he's made so many great movies, and they're, in my mind, all fantastic. But there certainly is quite a range of subject and intensity to those movies. But we're going to do one that, feel free to guess, but it's not one of the more common ones. But before we get back to that, we are going to have a guest coming on for our next episode, who's not sure how to put this, but a bit more of a celebrity than previous episodes. Someone who we reached out to, who's not just an immediate friend of ours. So look forward to a voice you will probably recognize on the show.
Get excited. We're excited.
Yes.
Yeah, we can't wait. Can't wait.
All right. Keep on watching, and we'll see you next time.